The FIA just held its emergency summit on the 2026 rules. Every team boss, every power unit maker, every technical chief locked in a room to fix the single biggest crisis Formula One has faced in a generation. Cars slowing down mid-straight, drivers getting passed by their own power systems. A 50G crash caused by energy harvesting. That meeting was supposed to deliver answers. It delivered nothing. Not a single rule was changed. And the next race is 11 days away. February 2026. The new Formula One cars rolled out of their garages at the Bahrain International Circuit for the very first time, and within hours the paddock already knew something was deeply wrong. The rules had promised a new dawn, smaller cars, quicker machines, a new era of electric power that would make the sport faster and more exciting than ever before. Audi and Ford had put up billions based on that promise. Honda came back to the sport for it. The entire business future of Formula One was built on the belief that these rules would work. The cars hit the track, and right away started doing something Formula One cars had never done before. They were slowing down on the straights, not braking for corners, not lifting for traffic, slowing down in the middle of a straight line because the batteries were draining faster than anyone had predicted, and the electric motor was running out of energy, with hundreds of meters still to go before the braking zone. The data showed speed losses of 56 km per hour before drivers even touched the brake pedal. 56 km per hour is not a small tuning problem. The car is actively slowing itself down while the driver has the throttle flat to the floor. The contradiction became the defining feature of the new era. The harder a driver pushed, the slower they actually went. The paddock quickly gave the 2026 season a name, the Battery World Championship, and it was not a joke. The corners at Suzuka that used to split the brave drivers from everyone else, the high-speed S's where bravery used to define a qualifying lap, are now nothing more than battery charging stations. The cars travel 50 km per hour slower through those sections compared to the 2025 machines. Corners that once rewarded courage now reward caution. That is not a racing car with an electric boost. That is a hybrid commuter with a racing engine bolted to it. To understand why these cars behave this way, you need to look at what the rules changed under the bodywork. The old motor generator unit for heat recovery was removed entirely. The motor generator unit for kinetic energy was tripled in power, jumping from 120 kilowatts all the way to 350. Meanwhile, the combustion engine was cut from roughly 550 kilowatts down to about 400. The result is a power split, sitting around 55% combustion and 45% electric. Nearly half the car's power now comes from a battery that drains itself faster than the car can refill it during a single lap. The effect on qualifying was instant and crushing. A qualifying lap is supposed to be the purest form of speed in Formula One. One lap, everything the car has, flat out from start to finish. Under these rules, that idea basically does not exist anymore. Drivers have to manage energy software throughout every single lap. They cannot just push. They have to work out when to push, where to push, and how much pushing they can afford before the battery runs dry and the car starts coasting on its own. The Chinese Grand Prix showed exactly how fragile the system is. A throttle lift of just 2 to 3% tripped a software boundary in the car's control unit that completely wrecked a qualifying lap. A tiny input, one no human eye could see, crossed a line in the code and the car shut down its power entirely. The reaction over the team radio was unprintable. And then the situation went from embarrassing to genuinely dangerous. March 29th. Suzuka. Oliver Bearman came through the spoon curve in his Haas and ran straight into the back of Franco Colapinto's Alpine. Colapinto was not going slowly because he made a mistake. He was going slowly because his car was harvesting energy, traveling roughly 50 km per hour below the speed of the cars around him. Bearman had no time to react. The closing speed was enormous. The impact hit 50G. The drivers' group had warned about exactly this scenario before the season even started. Formal letters went to the FIA, laying out the danger of having cars on the same piece of track, traveling at wildly different speeds, depending on whether they were harvesting or sending out energy at any given moment. The speed gaps were unlike anything the sport had ever seen, not between different classes of car at an endurance race, but between identical Formula One machines on the same track at the same time. The warning was clear. Someone was going to get seriously hurt. Nobody with the power to act did anything about it. And then Bearman hit the wall at 50G. That crash did something that 3 races of terrible qualifying sessions, humbling mid-straight slowdowns on every television broadcast, and growing driver anger could not manage on their own. It forced the FIA to set up an emergency summit. The meeting took place on April 9th, a virtual session with senior technical staff from all 11 teams, power unit makers, FIA technical leaders, and Formula One management officials. Notice who was kept out of that meeting on purpose. Team bosses, The people who actually have the power to vote on rule changes were not invited. They joined for a separate session on April 20th, 11 days later. That choice tells you everything you need to know about what the April 9th summit was meant to do. It was not a crisis response. It was a data review exercise. A chance for engineers to show their numbers, agree that problems exist, nod politely across their screens, and go home without locking in anything that might shift the pecking order. The official summary after the meeting landed exactly as the paddock expected. Constructive dialogue. A pledge to make tweaks to some aspects of the rules in the area of energy management. Tweaks to some aspects of the area. That is the polite way of saying they will think about possibly looking into the situation at some point down the road. 6 specific fixes are sitting on the table right now, and not a single one was approved at this meeting. The most widely backed change would raise the superclipping power limit from 250 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts. This is a pure software change, no hardware needed, and it would make full throttle energy harvesting as smooth as the lift and coast method that drivers currently use to top up their batteries mid-lap. The real-world effect would be getting rid of the most dangerous speed gaps on track, because cars could harvest energy at full speed instead of sharply slowing down and turning into rolling roadblocks. The fix came from McLaren's engineering team, and most of the grid backs it. The fact that it was not approved at a meeting called to deal with the very crisis it would help solve tells you everything about the politics at play. The second fix would cut the maximum energy recovery per lap, which was already lowered from 9 megajoules down to 8 at Suzuka, with some teams now pushing to go as low as 6. The trade-off is harsh. Lower recovery limits would add 1 to 2 seconds per lap, making the cars even slower than they already are. The third option would cut peak power output below 350 kilowatts, spreading the available energy across longer stretches, but cutting the speed burst that is supposed to make these cars thrilling in the first place. The fourth fix would remove the active aerozone limits during qualifying entirely, giving teams the freedom to choose when and where to switch to straight-line mode, rather than being locked into set zones, similar to how the old drag reduction system worked before it was replaced. The fifth fix is the one every single team wants: more combustion engine power through higher fuel flow rates. And it is the one that is physically impossible to deliver this season. Those engines were designed and built over many years at a cost of billions, based on a set fuel flow design. You cannot boost their output by changing a software setting. You would need to rebuild the cooling systems, the fuel lines, the strength of the engine block itself, and the entire rear-end layout of every car on the grid. That option does not exist for 2026. And the sixth fix would clean up the software rules to get rid of the kind of code boundary that wrecked a qualifying lap in Shanghai, where the gap between a good lap and a ruined one was a throttle touch the driver could not even feel through his foot. 3 more meetings are now set before anything can be voted on. April 15th covers sporting rules. April 16th is a second technical session. And April 20th is when team bosses finally sit down with FIA and Formula One leaders to vote on these fixes. Any changes that get approved at that meeting still need a sign-off from the FIA World Motorsport Council before they can go live. That means the earliest any rule change could take effect is the Miami Grand Prix on May 3rd, a full 5 races into a season where the problems were clear from the very first lap of pre-season testing. The gap between spotting a crisis and being able to respond to it is measured in months, not days. And every race weekend that passes without a fix is another weekend of cars visibly slowing on straights, drivers managing software instead of racing, and the sport's reputation taking hits that no number of meetings can undo. The politics become even more absurd when you look at who gains from delay. Every week that passes without a rule change is another week where Mercedes can stretch their title lead under rules they were built for. Every meeting that ends without a vote is another meeting where Ferrari's turbo edge stays safe. The teams losing out under these rules, Red Bull and the midfield teams carrying extra weight, are the ones screaming for fast action. The teams winning are the ones pushing for patience, process, and proper steps. The system is working exactly as it was set up. It is just not set up to produce good racing. So who is this system actually serving? Not the fans watching at home. None of these voting details matter nearly as much as what they can see with their own eyes. Every race weekend, cars visibly slowing down on camera, qualifying laps that look careful instead of heroic, passes that feel like software glitches instead of earned moves. The show is suffering in real time, and every meeting that ends without a call is another week of that footage shaping what Formula One looks like to a global audience. New fans brought in by the Netflix era are watching their first full season under these rules and forming their view of the sport based on cars that slow down on purpose. That is not a problem you can fix with a committee vote in 3 weeks. That is reputation damage happening right now, in real time, on every screen, in every country where Formula One holds a broadcast deal. If you have been following this channel, you already know we have been tracking the 2026 rules crisis since the cars first turned a wheel in pre-season testing. If you are not subscribed yet, now is a good time. We are covering every step as it unfolds, and the next 11 days before the team bosses meet on April 20th are going to decide whether this season gets a lifeline or keeps falling apart. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. While all of this technical talk was happening inside the summit, the real block to real change was never engineering. It was politics. Every single proposed fix shifts who has the edge, and the teams currently winning under these rules have no reason at all to agree to any of it. Mercedes has owned the first 3 races, with back-to-back 1-2 finishes in Australia and China. The team openly said that qualifying needs work and asked how the sport could bring back the fast, brutal qualifying lap. But that nod came wrapped in a warning about political knives, a carefully chosen phrase making clear that Mercedes knows rivals are coming for its edge. Mercedes spent years building their car and power unit for exactly these rules. Any shift in how energy is managed threatens the lead they built at huge cost. No team is going to vote to make its own car slower. Nobody would. Ferrari carved out their own edge by building a smaller turbo to win race starts under this power unit formula. That was a careful engineering choice, one made after the FIA clearly told teams to design their cars to fit the rules as written. When rival teams pushed for changes to the start process that would have wiped out Ferrari's launch edge, Ferrari blocked them flat out, drawing a hard line against giving up any more ground. Ferrari also fought changes to engine measurement rules that rivals argued were aimed at Mercedes. Though a 2-method system was eventually agreed and takes effect in June, Ferrari is not blocking for the fun of it. They are guarding money spent in good faith based on rules that the governing body itself wrote and approved. And then there is Red Bull. The most dominant team of the old era has become the biggest victim of the new one. Max Verstappen sits 9th in the standings with just 12 points after 3 races. The Red Bull Ford power unit has reliability worries, and the car is roughly 9 to 10 kilograms overweight, costing several tenths per lap before the car even reaches the first corner. Red Bull's new leadership has been pushing for qualifying changes, but the team's political weight has dropped sharply alongside their results. It is hard to demand rule changes when you are fighting for points in the lower half of the midfield. The voting math makes real change through normal channels nearly impossible. Under the 2026 Concord Agreement, car rule changes need 7 of 11 teams to vote yes, with backing from both the FIA and Formula One management. Power unit changes need 4 of 5 engine makers, with Mercedes and Ferrari both actively guarding different edges, and smaller teams like Williams likely lining up with their engine partners. Getting the votes needed for anything beyond the tiniest software tweaks is extremely hard. There is only one clean path to real change: a safety order, which the FIA can push through on its own without any team vote. They used this exact method with the bouncing floor changes back in 2022, when cars were slamming into the ground so hard that drivers were suffering back pain and blurred vision. McLaren has pointed straight to this path, noting that if there is a safety side to the issue, the FIA has the power to simply make the call and skip the entire political process. The drivers are split on the rules, and the line cuts straight through the standings. Verstappen has been the loudest critic since pre-season testing, calling the cars terrible, anti-racing, and comparing the whole thing to Mario Kart. His view is that anyone who enjoys watching these cars does not understand what racing is supposed to be. The anger runs deeper than just bad results. Verstappen raised these exact worries back in 2023, when the rules were still being locked in, and nobody with the power to act did anything. Retirement is now openly on the table if the rules do not change. From 4 straight world titles, to wondering whether the sport is even worth racing in. That is not a driver having a bad weekend. This is a driver watching the thing he gave his life to become something he no longer knows. What happened at Suzuka might be the single strongest proof that these rules are broken. During the Japanese Grand Prix, one car passed another through the 130R corner without any input from the driver at all. The energy system simply pushed the trailing car past a rival on its own. The driver did not choose to pass. The software did. The view from inside the McLaren garage was blunt. The sport went from having the best cars ever built to the worst with one rule change. The drivers are at the total mercy of the power unit rather than in control of the machine. From the Ferrari garage, the view is the complete opposite. The take from the winning side of the paddock is that these are the best rules the sport has had in years, and that the loudest complaints are coming from teams that simply built worse cars. The new rules are creating more passing. The raw number of overtakes is up by a lot compared to last season, though even the drivers gaining from the current order privately admit that the power traits are far from ideal. That gap matters. A big share of those passes are driven by energy timing gaps, rather than by driver skill, bravery, or racecraft. The cars are getting past each other because their software is in different stages of charge and drain, not because one driver found a gap and threw the car into a move the other could not cover. On one point, every single driver agrees, no matter where they sit in the standings, qualifying must allow flat-out driving. The drivers' group met with FIA leaders at Suzuka and got promises that changes would be put in place before the Miami Grand Prix. Whether that promise lives through the political fight of the April 20th bosses meeting is another question entirely. Piled on top of the energy crisis and the political standoff is the weight problem. The minimum weight target for 2026 is 768 kilograms, 30 kilograms lighter than last season, even though the cars carry heavier battery packs. The grid is sharply split. Ferrari, Mercedes, and Audi are all under the limit, which gives them a huge racing edge that builds up over every single lap of every single race. McLaren sits right on target, but Red Bull and Aston Martin are 9 to 10 kilograms over, and Williams is a shocking 26 kilograms above the minimum. That works out to roughly 9/10 of a second per lap of pure time loss that no amount of design work or driver talent can make up for. The problem traces back to budget cap limits, blocking a quick fix, which means Williams is stuck carrying the weight of a small adult passenger in the car for the time being. The hard truth that nobody inside the FIA wants to say out loud is that the core problem with these rules cannot be fixed during the 2026 season. The extreme power split between combustion and electric energy is not a software setting. It is built into physical hardware that took years to design, build, and test. Raising combustion engine power would mean rebuilding the engines along with the cooling systems, fuel lines, and the entire rear-end layout of every car on the grid. Cutting back the electric motors share would wreck the business deal that brought Audi, Ford, and Honda into Formula One. These car makers signed contracts and put up billions based on a set level of electric power. Telling them the electric part is being scaled back after they built their whole program around it is not a talk anyone in charge wants to have. The question has already come up at the highest levels of the FIA whether the sport should think about moving to a totally different type of power unit 3 or 4 years from now. The idea of bringing back V10 engines has even been raised at the top of the governing body. When the leaders of the sport's own rule-making body are openly talking about going back to engine tech from 20 years ago, the crisis has gone past anything a meeting or software patch can fix. The April meetings will almost surely deliver what the paddock expects: a bump to the super clipping limit and a further cut in energy recovery caps before Miami, setting changes that smooth over the worst signs without touching the root cause. The key meeting on April 20th will decide whether team bosses can put aside their own racing interests long enough to approve even these small tweaks, or whether the sport will limp into Miami with rules that its own drivers, engineers, and now even its own governing body call deeply flawed. This crisis is not just about slow cars or boring qualifying sessions. It is what happens when business deals with car makers get locked into the rules before anyone checks whether the racing will be worth watching. When voting systems built to give teams a fair voice instead give winning teams the power to block change that would help the sport as a whole. When formal safety warnings from the drivers who risk their lives every weekend get put in a drawer and forgotten until someone hits a wall at 50G and the whole world is suddenly paying attention. Formula One built an entire era of rules around bringing in car companies, and nobody with the power to stop it asked the most basic question of all. Will these cars be fun to watch? The next 11 days will answer whether anyone in charge is finally willing to face that question, or whether Formula One's 2026 season will carry on as the most expensive compromise in the history of motorsport.